Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Keenan. I'm a community manager with Chainlink. I want to thank both the Ampleforth community, the Chainlink community, and the greater blockchain community for joining us today. In addition, we have Evan and Brandon and Richie of the Ampleforth team. Thank you for taking time out of you guys' busy schedules for joining us on this presentation and Q&A. So we'll be doing this a little different than some of our previous ones. We're going to bring what was going to be in one of our offline in-person meetups more virtual and bring it online. So the agenda for today is Evan and Brandon will be given about a 30-minute presentation about the limitations presented by high correlation seen in today's decentralized correlated collateral assets. And they'll be given a deeper dive into Ampleforth's solution and protocols. And then finally, they'll be wrapping it up with their use of Chainlink to minimize the risk of an Oracle attack and manipulations. Following this, we'll be opening a community Q&A where the goal is to allow the community to ask about their presentation, learn more about the integration between Ampleforth and Chainlink. And if you have questions, just drop them into the Pigeonhole link that will be into the comments section below. So with that, I'll give it to Evan and Brandon to take it away. And if you guys can maybe just start by giving a short introduction about yourselves, your roles at Ampleforth, and then you can go into your presentation.
Thanks, Keenan. Thanks for having us. I'd just also like to thank the broader blockchain community, the Ampleforth community, and the Chainlink community. My name's Evan. I'm one of the co-founders of Ampleforth. Brandon and I kind of work together on defining the protocol and creating messaging, and we work on product as well. And I think Brandon will introduce himself now.
Hey, yeah, I'm Brandon. So I'm also one of the co-founders. Work a lot more on the technical side, so really excited to talk about the project, how it works, and how it integrates with Chainlink.
Sweet, thanks guys. Yeah, so with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. If you want to maybe share your screen, then we can go into the presentation.
Yeah, let me go ahead and try sharing my screen. Let's see.
And then again, for everyone, it's just pigeonhole.app and then /chainlink1, and then we're dropping that into the comment section right now if you have questions that come up.
Okay, hopefully the screen share is working. Can everybody see my presentation? Brandon's nodding, so I'm taking that as a yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, so presentation, like Keenan mentioned, it'll just kind of capture the motivation for the Ampleforth solution. And then I'll hand it over to Brandon, whom I'm sure you guys will all want to hear from about the technical integration of the Chainlink Oracle and the architecture of our protocol. But yes, Ampleforth is a protocol for oracleized money. And we have a digital asset that's trading now on Bitfinex, Uniswap, Kuiper, and KuCoin called the AMPL. So first, I'll kind of start with a definition of decentralized finance. I'm sure you guys have all heard of this, but DeFi is a parallel financial system that exists beyond the reach of politics. And it succeeds largely by eliminating the need for central authorities. But DeFi is broken, at least in our opinion it is. The DeFi ecosystem has become increasingly centralized. And this trend, we believe, is driven by a systemic risk called hypercorrelation. That's just extremely high correlations that we see across digital assets in the space. Today's cryptocurrencies like ETH, BTC, Link as well are the building blocks of DeFi. They can be arranged to build new instruments for lending, borrowing, trading synthetic equities, and more. But they're also way too correlated, and this makes the system extremely fragile, presenting a systemic risk. So one of the ways that folks have safeguarded against these really, really high correlations and high volatility is by over collateralization. But that even still, just the normal price volatility of cryptocurrencies present constant risk of auto liquidation. So this is just a huge problem across the cryptocurrency space, but particularly if you're trying to construct new instruments on top of these primitives.
Evan, can I pause you for just a second?
Sure.
I know on YouTube it's looking, I think it's kind of small due to the viewing, maybe the horizontal or the vertical angle of the
Okay.
screen. I was wondering if you might be able to flip that. If you can quickly, great. If not, that's okay too. We'll link the presentation, but just getting some people requesting that.
Okay, let me just go ahead and share
take
a
a
different
second.
window.
Okay.
Okay, let's try this one. Share. Now let's go into presentation mode. Is this any better for folks?
Yep, I believe it is.
Okay, cool. Should I pick up where I am or go back to the top?
I would say pick up where you are. You could see it. It was just kind of small, so I think it was just a request. If we could make it bigger, let's make it bigger.
Okay, and by the way, this presentation will be shared online, so you can take a look at the PDF yourself.
Yep, and I'll be sharing and distributing that.
Great. So, anyways, today's cryptocurrencies are far too correlated. This makes the ecosystem fragile and presents a systemic risk. Projects like MakerDAO have now resorted to using USDC as collateral. So just the normal price volatility ETH in the panic sell that we saw a week ago caused their system to fail catastrophically, forcing them to introduce USDC as collateral. So I can't imagine this was an easy decision. They didn't really have much of a choice. But man, it really obviously calls to question the purpose of the system itself. We're now looking at DAI, and it's a stable coin that's collateralized by a stable coin that's collateralized by dollars. This is really kind of defeating the purpose of having decentralized stablecoin altogether. Just to kind of double wrap it in dollars doesn't really create or make for an environment that's beyond the reach of politics. And so we think this is kind of a big problem. We need to bootstrap new cryptocurrencies that are uncorrelated with Bitcoin. Otherwise, DeFi will be censorable and therefore meaningless. So let me just kind of repeat this one more time. This is a huge problem, right? DeFi is the most promising application of smart contract platforms today, right? But we need to bootstrap new cryptocurrencies that are uncorrelated with Bitcoin. Otherwise, DeFi will be censorable and therefore meaningless. And the AMPL is an oracleized money designed to be uncorrelated with other digital assets and uncensorable. It's not collateralized. It's meant to be uncorrelated, doesn't require a central authority. It doesn't utilize centralized assets whatsoever. The AMPL introduces a fundamentally different set of incentives for traders. It's an ERC20 token and a series of smart contracts that accepts 24-hour volume weighted average price from oracles and proportion increases, decreases AMPLs held in every user's wallet. So you can kind of see in the animation to the left that as price changes, the quantity of units being reflected increases or decreases. And this is very different than a stable coin because typically with any coin, the quantity of units in your wallet doesn't increase or decrease automatically. It doesn't typically happen without a transaction, but in our system, the quantity of units in your wallet automatically increases or decreases proportionally in response to price. These new incentives cause the AMPL to move differently in the market. So because gains and losses in our network are reflected in both the quantity of units you held and the price per unit, traders have to devise new strategies for how to trade it. So you can think about it this way, like imagine the price of the token is changing, but you're also getting more or less of the token. So there's two dimensions to consider now in terms of gains and losses. And this behavior is expected to produce a different movement pattern in the marketplace that will have lower long run correlation with Bitcoin and other decentralized assets. And it's already starting to bear out that way. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Brandon, who can dive a little bit deeper into the protocol, what we mean by a different movement pattern, and also talk about the technical architecture of the Oracle integration that we have with Chainlink.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Evan, for giving all the background motivation there. So now we can dive into the mechanics and more details about how it operates. So yeah, let's get to it. Ampleforth is deployed on top of Ethereum. The rules of the protocol are actually very, very simple, which is one thing that we appreciate a whole lot about the protocol. We could write down the algorithm on the back of a napkin. It's only a few core rules. that you need to communicate to understand how it works. And so the fundamental idea about what the goal of the protocol is, or what it's trying to do, is that it's continuously trying to seek a price supply equilibrium, right? So if the price of the AMPL token gets higher than the target price, then it starts increasing the supply so that the supply and the demand can meet again in the long term. If the price is below the target, then it starts decreasing supply such that they meet again at an equilibrium point. So the rules about how this happens is there is a target price that is taken as input to the system. And then we also get the price from the marketplace. And so in this diagram on the right of the protocol slide here, you can kind of see three distinct regions, right? So around the price target PT, there is what we call an equilibrium band. So if the price is within this band, then no supply changes take place. But if it goes too high, too far above this delta, then it gets into the expansion state. When it gets too low, below the target equilibrium band, then it goes into a contraction state. And that's the main direction that the protocol is moving. So we can walk through a simple example. So I guess one other key detail here is that when the supply increases or decreases, there's no special actor or no special entity, right? So everyone is sort of treated equally in the system, where everyone's holdings, whether you're a contract or a EOA, like a raw address, everyone's balances goes up and down proportionally to what they own. So if we walked through a particular example here on the diagram to the left, you can see a price history. So in the first stage, the price is going up and down around the price target, but staying within equilibrium band. So between time 0 and time 1, on the right, you can see the supply remains constant. Now, once the price goes over the equilibrium band, it gets into an expansion period. And so the supply starts increasing globally to everyone. And then if it goes back down to the equilibrium band again, then the supply also goes back to an unchanging state. So if you were to look at this price movement pattern of any other coin, buying and selling between before T1 and after T2 would be fundamentally the same, right? You wouldn't achieve any gains or losses. But in AMPL's case, because there's an expansion period in between time T1 and time T2, by the time you get to T2, you have more physical tokens in your wallet. So what this means is that if you're a trader, you can't just copy paste your trading patterns like you do on other coins to AMPL, because you're not making use of all the information available to you. So through the process of reaching a price supply equilibrium and reflexing back to the target price for the coin, you end up with different incentives in play for traders, but also a different activity in the marketplace. So what information would a trader want to look at if they were to start trading with AMPLs? So the biggest indicator, I think, the first thing you look at would be market cap. So since the value changes are measured in both supply and price, traders would look at the combination of those, which is price times supply. So here in the market cap series, you can see there's a window of time after which expansion happens, but before price has corrected back to the equilibrium. And during that time window, there is an arbitrage opportunity for traders to take advantage of, right? So so that's the key. So the rebase happens instantaneously within one transaction. So the protocol incorporates price information into supply, but it's the traders who are normal profit-seeking traders who incorporate the supply back into the price. And so it's this symbiosis that creates this sort of long-run march back into the equilibrium state, no matter where the system is in. So it is probably worth saying before we get into technical details that we're often called a stablecoin, and we have a lot of characteristics in common with stablecoins, in the sense that we have a price target and we have a policy that starts to adjust the system back into an equilibrium state where the market price is equal to some sort of target price. But we're a little bit more than that, in the sense that we do embrace a certain amount of volatility. So it is the volatility of the AMPL in the marketplace is actually the core mechanic that drives the supply increases and decreases. And so we do welcome a certain amount of volatility. That's part of the system, part of what makes it interesting, especially in the short term. But long term, it does continually march towards an equilibrium point. And as the system gets more mature, we expect those equilibrium windows to become longer, and the volatile windows we're searching for the next market cap to get shorter. So you can even, if you pull up our dashboard or the price history of AMPL since launch up until today, you can really see this sort of step function like movement pattern taking place in the actual market. And so during periods between a lot of activity in the project, you see the sort of long windows in time where we are within the equilibrium band. And then when there is some sort of nudge to the system, there's a short period of volatility before it reaches the next equilibrium point. So we think that's really exciting to see that sort of behavior, and we're really interested to see how that continues to evolve over time. So now we'll get into the architecture. So there are three main components to the system. So there's the ERC20 token itself that represents the AMPL token. And then there is what we call the supply policy. The supply policy takes input from the oracles and then directs the token to either increase or decrease supply. And so it gets these inputs from the oracles in our system. The supply policy has one globally callable function that we call the rebase function. The rebase function is what does this rebalancing operation. Anyone can call rebase, so it doesn't have to be us. There's no restrictions on there, except that it can only execute once per day and within a particular window. So rebase happens about 2 a.m. UTC, which is right now 7 p.m. Pacific time or 10 p.m. Eastern time every single day. And then we use two different oracles in the system. So we have a market oracle that provides the price information of the token in the marketplace for the last day. And then we have the CPI oracle. So specifically, the market oracle doesn't just give us the market spot price. In fact, we absolutely do not want the market spot price, because we don't want to be open to manipulation right around the time that the rebase executes. So instead, we take in the 24-hour volume weighted average price from all the different marketplaces in which AMPL is traded. And then we also have a CPI oracle. So the CPI oracle, CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. This feeds into the target price that Ampleforth is trying to seek, right? So right now we're not targeted to the dollar, the US dollar per se. Instead, we targeted the US dollar, like $1 at the time of launch. And then we take in a consumer price index as a measure or index that we target against, right? So going through time, as the value or the purchasing power of $1 naturally decreases through the process of management, the inflation that's just naturally occurring in our current monetary system, the purchasing power of one AMPL is meant to remain constant. So we target the 2019 US dollar, not just the US dollar. So 10 years from now, one AMPL's purchasing power might equal to $1.10 or $1.15, depending on how the US dollar is managed between now and then. Right, so we have the market oracle that gives us price, and then we have the CPI oracle that gives us information that we use to target, and these each determine the magnitude of the rebase adjustments. So now we can dive into the architecture of each particular oracle. So when we launched, we didn't have the luxury of working or building on top of Chainlink, because we were launching around the same time. So we had to build up sort of our own system to begin with. So this was our sort of launch way of getting data into the system. It was highly centralized because it was coming just from us and from no one else. So if our systems went down, then we would stop getting price information. Our oracle would be halted, essentially. Same for the CPI. And so now that we've integrated with Chainlink, we have the ability, we have the luxury of much greater level of decentralization. So now it's a combination of both us as providers and also Chainlink as providers. The major exchanges we're on is Bitfinex, KuCoin, are the centralized exchanges. That's where most natural activity happens. But we're also on a number of DEXs like Uniswap, Bancor, and Kyber, and now Diversify as well. And so we want to aggregate the market activity from all of these together to provide the final value that's used by the policy. So through the Chainlink Oracle, we get our price information from 3 different aggregators, Brave New Coin, Kaiko, and Crypto Compare. These aggregators all collect data from these various exchanges and calculate 24-hour volume weighted average price. And then for each one of these aggregators, we have 3 different Chainlink node operators that report that data on chain for us to use, right? So Ampleforth goes directly to exchanges, but Chainlink, one nice thing about it is it goes through these aggregators that have lots of ability to remove outliers and clean up the data that is sort of necessary to get an accurate signal on the marketplace. And we don't want to rely on just a single reporter for each one of these, because any one of those could go down for any number of reasons. So we have 3 reporting each one of those, and then those values are all combined to provide the final result. The way these are combined is we combine them with the median function. So the reason why we use the median is such that instead of the average, for example, is that if we use the median function, we reduce the amount of trust on any individual in the system, right? So if you use an average function, it would only take one provider to report an extremely high or extremely low value, and they could increase the price because everyone has weight in the system. But with a median function as the aggregation function, you would have to either collude with or compromise greater than 50% of the reporters to impact the final value. So we use a median function to combine the different aggregators together into the final value. So the CPI metric that we use, specifically, it's the PCE, which is the personal consumption expenditures, as it's measured and reported by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is data that is measured by lots of economists, and it's reported and updated once every month. So the CPI value is grabbed simply from a web service that's freely available to anyone and then reported on chain. We also have 3 different reporters of the CPI number, and then we have this update every month or so. So it's also the second Oracle is much simpler than the first one because the data is a lot simpler and doesn't change as often. In terms of reporting frequency, the market Oracle reports, we're only guaranteed to use it once per day, and so we only guarantee freshness once per day around the time of rebase. For the CPI Oracle, it's called much less often. I think it's called once a day still, or maybe once a week. I'd have to look up that number. Yeah, it changes much less frequently than the market data does. Yeah, so thank you. I think that's the details of the system and how it's put together. I think we're going to do some questions at the end, so happy to answer more questions there, and if they come up.
Cool, thank you guys.
Yeah, real quick, I'm just going to summarize one more time what we covered here. I think I might have run into a couple issues with the display in that we went from kind of a big screen to one that showed both like the notes and the presentation side by side. I don't know if that's a problem for you guys, but I just got some feedback from somebody who was watching the presentation. Do you mind if I very quickly go through this?
Not at all. Not at all, Evan.
All right. Don't worry, I won't take too long here. Let's see. Cool. So real quick, to summarize, Decentralized finance is a parallel financial system beyond the reach of politics. It succeeds by eliminating the need for central authorities. But DeFi is broken and it's becoming increasingly centralized, and we believe this is driven by systemic risk called hypercorrelation. Today's cryptocurrencies are the building blocks of DeFi, and they can be arranged to build all sorts of new instruments for lending, borrowing, trading synthetic equities, and more. But today's cryptocurrencies are also way too correlated. This makes the ecosystem fragile and presents a systemic risk. Projects like MakerDAO have now resorted to using USDC as collateral. They are now a stable coin collateralized by a stable coin collateralized by a dollar. And this is kind of defeating the purpose of a decentralized stablecoin altogether. That's just evidence to suggest how severe the problem is. We need to bootstrap new cryptocurrencies that are uncorrelated with Bitcoin. Otherwise, DeFi will be censorable and therefore meaningless. The AMPL is an oracleized money. It was designed to be uncorrelated and uncensorable. Happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Evan. Yeah, I think that really helps with some of the technical difficulties at the beginning. So I have a few questions here for you guys, and then you guys can choose who you want to answer. The first ones are a little more generalized. But what challenge, I think you kind of just mentioned some of this, but what was the real challenge that you're trying to solve when you started integrating with Chainlink and when you first started solving this problem? What got you into wanting to work on this problem?
Yeah, totally. I can take that. So really, when Brandon and I kind of started thinking about designing a protocol, we kind of saw the opportunity here with blockchain technology to advance upon monies. So, thinking about it from that perspective, there's just kind of two ways to look at what folks like us and Maker and others are doing, and Bitcoin even really is like, things like Maker are trying to take the banking system, the central banking system, and decentralize it. Whereas folks like Bitcoin are trying to take base monies and kind of advance them by making it digital. So you can see with like Bitcoin, they turned gold into something that's a digital gold, whereas Maker's just trying to recreate the central banking system in a decentralized fashion. So we took a similar approach to Bitcoin, where we're trying to advance upon these base monies. So we took a commodity money, right? Like a fixed supply natural commodity money, and we wanted to turn it into an elastic commodity money, one whose supply could increase or decrease in response to demand. It's kind of like oracleizing money, giving money the ability to see what's going on in the market and automatically adjust supply counter-cyclically in response to demand. And I'll add here that the supply adjustments are proportional. So if you own 1% of the AMPL network, $1 million market cap, you'll own 1% of 10 million market cap. You'll just have 10 times more units. It's kind of the basis of this whole thing. It's about finding a price supply equilibrium. And I know, like Brandon mentioned, that there are some similarities with stablecoins in the sense that we do have a price target, but this is actually kind of a volatile coin. Like it can appreciate from like $1 million to $1 billion, and it can fall from like $1 billion to 500 million or whatever, just like any other asset. It just so happens that it always snaps into this equilibrium state where one AMPL has the purchasing power of one 2019 dollar. So kind of has the same price appreciation potential as a Bitcoin, but becomes a stable coin over time. So if you can imagine Bitcoin evolving into something that could eventually replace the need for banks because it becomes price stable for longer and longer periods of time, where it can still be interrupted by volatility like a panic sell or a macro trend. But these periods of stability last longer and longer, way, way, way down the line. That's kind of the approach we're taking here. Like, how do we take a money and extend its functionality so that you could one day create a money that doesn't require a bank? And of course, the one thing that allows us to advance upon commodity monies like gold or Bitcoin is the ability to see price, right? So it needs to interact with a piece of information that's typically considered to be outside the money itself. And that's where we need to introduce an oracle. So we actually did a lot of macroeconomic research and listed really kind of smart and influential academic advisors to kind of inform the design of this coin. We really just asked this question of like, okay, what's wrong with gold anyways? It's a pretty good asset, right? What's wrong with Bitcoin? How do we take this to another level? and came to this conclusion that the limitation of these fixed supply monies is that they have fixed supply. They'll always be somewhat volatile, just as gold is somewhat volatile, because it can't adjust its supply in response to demand, and it can run into kind of liquidity concerns if it's used as a collateral asset for a banking system. And so the innovation here was creating a money that can see what's going on in the outside world in a very, very limited scope. It can kind of see one thing, which is the nominal exchange rate of the coin on exchanges. And of course, that requires an oracle. And so when we brought the oracle into the picture, the pro was we're advancing upon fixed supply assets and commodity monies on the whole. The con was it's a risk of centralization, because at the time there wasn't a generalized solution to the oracle problem, right? And I still think that it's going to be very difficult to generalize a solution to all oracle problems, but the price oracle problem is becoming much more reasonable to solve. And so working with folks like Chainlink are huge, because it takes us a step closer to having a decentralized oracle. And like I said, this is the only risky part of our system, is the fact that it accepts information from outside sources. It's the only thing that separates it from a natural commodity money. But the very thing that allows us to advance upon natural commodity monies is the thing that introduces risk. And so we take it very seriously. And so when we kind of met Dan and Chainlink early on, we were really bullish on working with you guys, who were willing to dedicate the sole purpose of your existence to making it possible to construct these systems in a sustainable way. And so really, we got really lucky, that this space has matured to the point where we're not the only people working on the problem. There's an entire ecosystem to support it. And collaborating with Chainlink has just been hugely important. Now, I'll say that like not all oracleized systems are equally risky. So in our case, like an oracle breach would never result in, say, theft, because we don't custody assets. We're not a bank, right? We never custody a person's assets. We don't when we increase the supply or decrease the supply, it's not by sending money or airdropping or buying back. It's by adjusting this global scalar coefficient. And so as the system responds to price, it happens kind of in a single transaction that just updates this like coefficient of expansion, if you will. If you kind of think of it as like a global constant, like the gravitational constant. Like imagine you could change that constant, and all of a sudden all the planets get closer together, get tighter, or you could decrease the constant, and all of a sudden the planets get farther apart, right? They're looser, right? That's how we're modifying supply. But we do require this price information feed in order to do that responsibly once every day. And that's where Chainlink comes into the picture, right? The one piece of the puzzle that makes the system different and allows us to advance upon existing monies. Now, it so happens that the fact that supply changes and increases or decreases in response to price results in a different movement pattern. And that was kind of the thesis and abstract. We said we analyzed this system. Our academic advisors, forced us to kind of articulate it using the language of economics and think very carefully about how this might play out. And we kind of came to the conclusion that this, if it works as we believe, will start to move in a more step function like pattern. So we don't see this at all with like traditional assets or any crypto assets. It's always just kind of this analog continuous signal. And you look at these head and shoulder ranges and you see all this technical analysis, like trend lines over the course of like 200 days corresponding to price. In our system, all the trend lines will have to correspond with market cap, and the fundamental different incentive mechanism causes it to move in more of a step function like pattern, where it'll be stable, right? And then it'll be interrupted by, downward pressure or upward pressure, causing supply to increase, right? So the market cap curve will like step up or step down. But eventually what will happen is it'll enter this state of equilibrium where each AMPL has the purchasing power of $120.19. And that's all a function of this feedback system that incorporates one piece of outside information, which is the 24-hour volume weighted price.
Yeah, you seem very, very passionate about this, and thanks for that answer. As you're answering that, there's a lot of upvotes for it sounds that Chainlink and decentralized oracles are very necessary for your system and
yeah.
protocol network. How easy was it to implement Chainlink into your existing Oracle solution? Knowing that you guys were both launching at the same time, and overall, just how easy was it to implement Chainlink, and how was it working with the Chainlink team?
Yeah, I'm going to let Brandon take that one.
Sure. Yeah. It was actually great working with the Chainlink team. So we had very open lines of communication there, and so we could get things done when we need to, and always have someone to talk to. I think it was harder to get the data providers to provide the data than it was to get Chainlink to provide that data to the chain. So for example, we use the 24-hour volume weighted average price, and so not every aggregator calculates this data for the marketplace. And so we actually had to work with some of those aggregators to get them to actually calculate this value to begin with, and calculate it in an accurate way. And so a lot of those relationships we only really got access to through Chainlink because they work with a lot of these data sources. And so it was much easier to get this done by working with Chainlink. That was one of the biggest processes there. And then aside from that, it was fairly simple into our system because they have developers on their side that build the smart contracts for the Oracle according to the requirements that we would need. And then at that point, it's just a matter of sending data, which is kind of a natural thing for smart contracts on Ethereum to do.
Great.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say a little bit more about just kind of working with Chainlink, because I did kind of get to interact with Sergey quite a bit throughout the process, and he was really, really helpful. I actually wrote a blog post about this story, but yeah, I mean, I feel there was this one kind of breakthrough moment. It was a really short meeting, so I went down to Palo Alto, and Dan encouraged me to talk to Chainlink, or actually to talk to Sergey to get advice. And the one thing that he said to me was like, he doesn't care that much about oracles. He cares some, right? He cares more about what the world will one day do with oracles than oracles themselves. And that's kind of the moment where I realized that, okay, this guy really does care about the developer ecosystem. That's why he's been helping us, right? Because he doesn't just care about the concept of an abstract oracle. He cares about how oracles will one day affect the world. And we were creating an oracleized money. And just on top of that, it gave us a lot of really good advice, just even beyond the scope of just AMPL and Chainlink, just advice as a human being. And I think we were really lucky to have that.
Yeah, that's great. I remember reading your blog post. So thanks for sharing that. So I mean, there's a couple comments from the community. So Ampleforth in a way is almost like a algorithmic central bank. Is that something that you kind of frame it as?
I would not call it that. I mean, I can understand why you might want to call it that, but it's definitely not a bank. So the thing about banks is banks have balance sheets. So they have assets and liabilities, right? And as a result, they take custody of things. So they accept deposits and they field withdrawals, and thus they have a balance sheet, right? Whereas monies, like gold itself, doesn't have a balance sheet. It doesn't owe anybody anything. And so Ample is very much a money and not a bank. So while it's kind of a variant, you can think of it as a variant of Bitcoin that could eventually evolve into something that resembles a stable coin, where like, just as we believe Bitcoin over time will become less volatile and become a better store of value like gold, the same would happen over time with Ample, except for when it achieves that, it'll just be in these long stretches of equilibrium and then eventually get interrupted. And then find another long stretch of equilibrium, and then eventually get interrupted again, and then find a new stretch of equilibrium. So you can kind of think of it as a money that has the potential to evolve into something that doesn't necessarily require a balance sheet or a bank. And so that's what was exciting for our academic advisors as well. They were not at all, like when we started building this, we had this bank, right? We had this kind of bond system and a buffer and algorithmic reserve. And they were just not that interested. They liked us and they heard us out, and they were just not super interested. And then Brandon and I kind of made this tweak, and we said like, okay, well, what if we drop the reserve? Like, wouldn't that be a more fault tolerant system? Wouldn't that be a fairer system? I mean, it wouldn't be as stable, but it could become as stable in a very, very long run. It just wouldn't be that stable near term. And as soon as we went back to them and had taken the balance sheet out, they were like, oh, let's talk. Now you're talking, right? Because they saw from 1,000 feet away that the potential here with blockchain technology wasn't necessarily to recreate central banking, which is very complicated. And it's not even very easy to agree upon what the problems of central banking are, and central banking is successful because it's highly discretionary, right? People can make emergency adjustments, like you see the Fed right now trying to inject $2 trillion worth of stimulus, right? That's an emergency situation, and the people who are running those banks need to have the ability to change their rules at their discretion. And so when we came back to our academic advisors with a rules-based money that didn't have a balance sheet, that wasn't a central bank or alternative bank, then they got really excited, because having understood the economics and the history of monies and where Bitcoin fit into that trajectory, they saw the opportunity to innovate here being one of innovating upon monies, not so much one of innovating upon banks.
Got it. Cool. Thanks for that answer.
Sure.
So to follow up, would you say that Ample would serve as a good collateral for backing a loan, and in what cases might it be superior to other ones that are out on the market, such as DAI or USDC or some of these other ones that you see?
So it's even lower on the level on the stack, right? So when we think about DAI, I kind of think about DAI as a derivative, right? Because it is collateralized by other assets. So prior to the introduction of USDC, it was itself collateralized by ETH and basic attention token, right? And initially it was just purely collateralized with ETH. So when I think about the base monies that underlie that system, it was really ETH and basic attention token. And now they're introducing USDC, which is effectively US dollars. And so those are the collateral assets that DAI uses to create DAI. And then we see new instruments being built on top of DAI. So at the lowest level of the stack are these base monies that are never collateralized, and they have very different properties than things like DAI. And so the way I see Ample fitting in is as part of a basket of assets, right, that in aggregate are less volatile, which could be used to construct new instruments. So right now, when the maker team introduced multi-collateral DAI, they had the option of putting, let's say, even like 1,000 cryptocurrencies in that basket. But they didn't do that because these cryptocurrencies are so highly correlated that adding more cryptocurrencies doesn't reduce volatility in aggregate. In fact, it kind of just increases your beta, because you see Bitcoin move up 5%, and then you see an altcoin move up like 10%, right? Or you see Bitcoin move down 5%. You see an altcoin move down 10%, right? So that doesn't diversify your risk at all. So what you want, if you're thinking about a basket of assets in general, that's more fault tolerant, is you want a bunch of members of that basket to be uncorrelated. And so the more uncorrelated assets we can put in a basket, the less volatile the aggregate portfolio of assets is going to be. And that in aggregate can serve as base collateral for constructing instruments like DAI, which is more of like a derivative, right? And so we're really kind of on that base level of the stack, where when I think about the primitives that underlie DeFi today, those primitives are really kind of ETH and Bitcoin, because they're very liquid, but they're also non-collateralized. They're as atomic. And now we're adding yet another collateral asset system, which is just USDC in the case of Maker, which itself is just fiat money, which itself is also not collateralized, right? It's kind of at the discretion of policymakers. And so when we're thinking about creating a decentralized equivalent of a collateralized system, you'd want to have many of these base monies that are as uncorrelated as possible.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. So I think with that, we'll start to wrap it up. If you have do you have any final words that you would like to say, Evan or Brandon?
I'd say just thanks for tuning in. We're really excited about what we're working on. I think you can tell that from Evan and the way he talks about it. So hopefully you guys are as excited about it as we are, and can tell your friends about it. I think that'd help out the project a lot. Also, we do have a neat upcoming system that we're calling the Ample Geyser, which is a way to help distribute some more Ample tokens to people who help out the ecosystem through things like supply and liquidity. So you can read a whole lot more about that on our Medium, which you can find on our webpage, ampleforth.org. We also have a really active Telegram community that you can find on there as well. And hope to see you around.
Yeah, thanks guys. Check out ampleforth.org and tell everybody that we need more cryptocurrencies that are uncorrelated with Bitcoin. Thanks,
Awesome.
guys.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, so thanks, everyone. I think that wraps it up for this virtual meetup and Q&A. I appreciate everyone who joined us on the live stream. We'll be putting out all these links through our Discord and Reddit within either today or tomorrow after we get done editing this video. I want to thank again Evan and Brandon for joining us and for the presentation. And then other team members also that really helped put all this together. Rory, everyone knows, with Chainlink, and then Richie, who I've been going back with Ampleforth, has really helped make this all come together. So I really want to thank them as well. And we're looking to do a lot more of these in the future virtually. So make sure to just subscribe to our channel for more content from the Chainlink team. Thanks, everyone.